Picture this, you've planned the perfect intimate wedding, 12 guests, a secluded countryside manor, everything meticulously arranged. But what happens when rock and roll's most unpredictable legend decides your wedding is his next adventure? Sarah Mitchell stood in front of the gilded mirror, her vintage lace dress catching the afternoon light streaming through the manor's stained glass windows. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her grandmother's pearl necklace. In exactly 2 hours, she would marry James Thompson, her college sweetheart, surrounded by only their closest friends and family. 12 guests. That was the plan. Intimate. Perfect. Controllable. You look absolutely radiant, her maid of honor whispered, squeezing her shoulder. But Sarah couldn't shake the strange feeling gnawing at her stomach. That morning, a black raven had perched on their window sill, staring at her with unsettling intensity. Her grandmother would have called it an omen. Sarah tried to laugh it off, but the feeling persisted. Something unexpected was coming. Something that would turn their perfect day into something unforgettable. Little did she know, chaos was already pulling into the driveway. James paced in the library downstairs, straightening his bow tie for the 100th time. The Tudor-style manor they'd rented sat on 20 acres of isolated English countryside, 3 hours from London. No paparazzi, no uninvited guests. No drama. His best friend Marcus had joked that the place looked like something out of a Gothic novel, all stone walls and ivy-covered turrets. But that's exactly what they wanted, complete privacy. The guest list was sacred, both sets of parents, Sarah's sister and brother, James's 2 brothers, Marcus and his wife, and Sarah's childhood best friend Katie with her husband. 12 people who mattered most. They'd even hired security to ensure no one else could stumble upon their celebration. Everything's locked down tight, the security guard confirmed, checking his watch. The gates are sealed. No one gets in without your explicit permission. James nodded, finally allowing himself to relax. What could possibly go wrong? That's when they heard the sound that would change everything. The unmistakable roar of a vintage motorcycle engine tearing up the gravel driveway. The rumble grew louder, echoing off the manor's stone walls like thunder. Everyone froze. The security guard's radio crackled to life. "Sir, we have a situation at the front gate. A man on a motorcycle is demanding entry. He says he's Ozzy Osbourne and he's here for the wedding." James's blood ran cold. "What? That's impossible. Tell him he has the wrong venue. Tell him to leave. Now." But before the guard could respond, they heard it. A voice that had screamed its way through decades of rock history, now bellowing cheerfully from the entrance hall. "Hello. Ice T-E-D. I-B-R-O-H-T-M-P." Sarah appeared at the top of the grand staircase, still in her wedding dress, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. There, standing in their private manor's foyer, surrounded by their bewildered guests, was Ozzy Osbourne himself, black leather jacket, tinted glasses, wild grey hair. And yes, he was indeed holding several bottles of expensive champagne. "How did you?" "The gates were. Security was." James stammered, unable to form a complete sentence. Ozzy grinned, that legendary mischievous smile that had gotten him both worshipped and banned from countless venues. "Gates. Mate, I've broken into Buckingham Palace. You think your gates would stop me?" But here's where the story gets truly bizarre. Ozzy had a reason for being there, and it wasn't what anyone expected. "Listen, I know this looks crazy," Ozzy said, setting down the champagne bottles on an antique side table. "But I need to explain. 3 weeks ago I was doing a charity event in London. Some elderly woman approached me, grabbed my hand, and made me promise something. She had these intense blue eyes, reminded me of my mum. She said her granddaughter was getting married in the countryside, and it was her dying wish that someone legendary would bless the union." Sarah's knees nearly gave out. What was her name?" "Margaret. Margaret Mitchell. She showed me a photo of you, love. Said you were her whole world." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. Her grandmother Margaret had passed away 2 months ago. The same grandmother whose pearls she now wore. The same grandmother who had always told her that life's magic came from unexpected moments. She also said, Ozzy continued softly, his voice losing its usual rasp, that you'd be wearing her pearls. And that I'd know the place by the raven that guarded it. Marcus whispered to James, "This is either the most beautiful thing ever, or we're all having the same fever dream." But the story was only beginning, because Ozzy Osbourne never does anything halfway. The skepticism in the room was palpable. James's father, a stern banker from Manchester, stepped forward. "Now see here, Mr. Osbourne, this is a private ceremony. We appreciate the gesture." But nothing," Ozzy interrupted, pulling out his phone. "Look, she made me video record the promise. I've got proof." He fumbled with the device. Technology had never been his strong suit, until finally, a shaky video appeared. There was Margaret Mitchell, looking frail but fierce, in what appeared to be a hospital room. "Mr. Osbourne." Her voice crackled through the speaker. "My Sarah is getting married. I won't be there. But I know you're a man of your word, despite what the papers say. Promise me you'll bring some rock and roll magic to her day. Promise me you'll remind her that life is meant to be lived loudly." The video showed Ozzy, visibly moved, taking her hand. "I promise, love. I'll finally be there." There wasn't a dry eye in the manor. Even the security guard was wiping his face. Sarah descended the stairs slowly, approaching the Prince of Darkness himself. "My grandmother sent you." "She did, and I'm a man of my word, even if it means crashing weddings." He paused, suddenly looking uncertain. "So, am I invited, or should I go? Because I really will leave if you want. I just had to keep my promise to her first." "What would you do if Ozzy Osbourne crashed your wedding with a promise from your deceased grandmother?" James looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at James. Then, simultaneously, they both burst out laughing. The kind of laughter that only comes when reality becomes so absurd that you have no choice but to surrender to it. "You know what?" Sarah said, her voice steadying. "Grandmother always said she'd find a way to make my wedding memorable. I just didn't think she meant to just memorable." "So that's a yes?" Ozzy asked hopefully. "That's a yes," James confirmed, extending his hand. "Welcome to our wedding, Mr. Osbourne. You're guest number 13. Please call me Ozzy. And 13, that's my lucky number!" Always has been. What followed was perhaps the most surreal wedding preparation in history. Ozzy insisted on helping, which mainly involved him sharing increasingly bizarre stories from his decades in rock and roll while attempting to arrange flowers. He accidentally knocked over a vase. He confused the wedding cake for a hat stand. He tried to convince the string quartet to jazz up Pachelbel's canon with some Black Sabbath riffs. "Mate, imagine canon in D but with the opening from Iron Man," he suggested enthusiastically. "It works, trust me." The quartet looked horrified. Sarah laughed so hard she nearly cried off her makeup. But as the ceremony time approached, something shifted. Ozzy became surprisingly serious. As guests took their seats in the manor's garden conservatory, Ozzy pulled Sarah and James aside. The setting sun painted everything in gold and amber. For a moment, the legendary madman looked almost vulnerable. "Listen, I know I'm chaos incarnate. Always have been. But Margaret made me promise something else too." He pulled out a worn envelope from his jacket. "She wrote you a letter. Asked me to make sure you read it before you walk down that aisle." Sarah's hands shook as she opened it. Her grandmother's handwriting, still elegant despite her illness, filled the page. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then Ozzy kept his word. I knew he would. Beneath all that madness is a good heart. I won't be at your wedding, but I needed to send you something more than just my pearls. I needed to send you a reminder. Marriage isn't about perfection. It's not about the perfect day, or the perfect guests, or the perfect plan. It's about saying yes to the unexpected. It's about finding joy when chaos crashes your party. Your grandfather and I, we got married during an air raid. The sirens were wailing. Half our guests ran for shelter. But we said our vows anyway, bombs or no bombs. That's what I want for you. The courage to say yes when life throws you curveballs. The wisdom to laugh when things go sideways. And the love to hold each other through every unexpected adventure. Now go marry that wonderful boy. And thank Ozzy for me. He's crazier than a bag of cats, but he's got a beautiful soul. All my love, grandmother. Could a letter from beyond the grave change how you view your entire wedding day?" Sarah couldn't speak. James wrapped his arms around her as she sobbed happy tears into his shoulder. Even Ozzy looked misty-eyed, though he'd probably deny it later. "Your Nan was something special," he said quietly. "In that hospital room, she told me stories for hours. About you, about life, about how she and your grandfather danced in the rubble after the war. She said the best marriages are the ones that start with a story worth telling." "Well," James laughed through his own tears. "We've definitely got that now." The ceremony began as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Marcus officiated, because he'd gotten ordained online specifically for this wedding. The 12 original guests sat in pristine white chairs, and in the back, in a slightly battered folding chair that the staff had quickly scrambled to find, sat Ozzy Osbourne, rock legend and promise keeper. When Marcus asked if anyone objected to the union, Ozzy shouted, "IOBJ all of you didn't tried." The entire gathering erupted in laughter. Even James's stern banker father cracked a smile. But the real magic happened during the vows. As Sarah and James exchanged their personally written promises, something extraordinary occurred. Ozzy, unbidden and unexpected, began to hum softly. It took a moment for anyone to recognize the melody, Changes, one of his most hauntingly beautiful songs. The notes drifted through the conservatory like a benediction. The string quartet, catching on, began to weave their instruments into his humming. Classical music and rock and roll merged into something that had never existed before and would never exist again. It was imperfect. It was unrehearsed. It was absolutely magical. Sarah's sister whispered, "This is the most insane and beautiful thing I've ever witnessed." When James kissed his bride, everyone cheered. Ozzy cheered the loudest. Standing up so fast he knocked over his chair. The reception that followed was unlike any wedding reception in recorded history. The intimate dinner for 12 had become a dinner for 13, and that one extra guest transformed everything. Ozzy told stories that made everyone laugh until they couldn't breathe. He talked about his own marriage to Sharon, the ups and downs, the chaos and the love. 40 years, he said, raising a glass. 40 bloody years of marriage. You know what the secret is? Not taking yourself too seriously, and having someone who loves you even when you're absolutely bonkers. But the night had one more surprise in store. After dinner, as the DJ, who was absolutely losing his mind at having Ozzy Osbourne at his gig, played the first dance song, Ozzy approached Sarah. "Your grandmother gave me one more thing," he said, pulling out a small, wrapped box. "She said to give this to you after you were officially married." Inside was an antique silver music box. When Sarah wound it up, it played a melody she'd never heard before. "Your grandfather composed that," Ozzy explained. "After the war. It was Margaret's favorite song, but he never recorded it properly. She hummed it for me in the hospital. I went to Abbey Road Studios, called in a few favors, and had it arranged and recorded. This is the only copy in the world." The melody was etchingly beautiful, simple and pure. Sarah imagined her grandparents in post-war London dancing to this song in a bombed-out ballroom, choosing joy despite devastation. "How did you? Why did you?" Sarah couldn't form the questions. "Because I promised your nan, and because..." Ozzy paused, his voice rough with emotion. "Because my own mum passed when I was young. And I know what it's like to wish someone could be there for your big moments. If I could give you even a piece of Margaret's presence today, well, that's worth more than all the platinum records in my house. What would you treasure more, a perfectly planned day or a perfectly imperfect story?" As the night wore on, the celebration took on a dreamlike quality. Ozzy taught James's grandmother how to throw rock horns. He debated philosophy with Sarah's father. He got into a surprisingly intellectual discussion about medieval architecture with Katie's husband. He even convinced the stern banker to do a shot of whiskey. "You know," Marcus said to James as they watched Ozzy animatedly explaining something to Sarah's mother, "when you told me you wanted a small, quiet, drama-free wedding, this is the exact opposite of what I imagined." "Yeah," James agreed, watching his new wife laugh with genuine, unrestrained joy. "It's so much better." At midnight, as the party finally began to wind down, Ozzy prepared to leave. He hugged everyone, yes, even the security guard who'd initially tried to keep him out. "Thank you," Sarah said, holding his hands, "for keeping your promise. For bringing my grandmother's love here. For reminding us that the best stories are the ones we never plan. Thank you for letting a crazy old rocker crash your wedding." Ozzy replied with his signature grin. "This was brilliant. And hey, if you ever need a babysitter, don't call me. I'm terrible with kids." Everyone laughed. He climbed onto his motorcycle, revved the engine dramatically, and paused. "One more thing," he shouted over the motor. "Margaret told me to tell you this life is a beautiful disaster. Dance in it!" And with that, the Prince of Darkness roared off into the night, leaving behind 13 guests and one legendary story. Years later, Sarah and James would tell their children about the wedding. About the 12 guests who became 13. About the grandmother who sent a rock legend from beyond the grave. About the promise that turned into magic. The story would grow with each telling. Sometimes Ozzy arrived on a helicopter. Sometimes he brought his whole band. Sometimes the Queen herself called to complain about the noise. But the heart of the story never changed. Sometimes the best blessings come from the most unexpected sources. The music box still sits on Sarah's bedside table. On their anniversary, they winded up and danced to the melody her grandfather composed and her grandmother preserved through sheer force of will and one very unusual promise. And whenever life gets too serious, too planned, too controlled, they remember the day Ozzy Osbourne crashed their wedding. They remember that sometimes you have to say yes to chaos. That sometimes the 13th guest is exactly what you need. That sometimes the best adventures are the ones you never saw coming. Margaret Mitchell knew that. Ozzy Osbourne proved it. And Sarah and James lived it. The manor still stands in the English countryside. The gates are still there, but now there's a small plaque near the entrance that reads, "Blessed by the Prince of Darkness, May 15th, 2024. 13th guest, first legend." So here's the question that matters. If fate sent you an uninvited guest to your perfectly planned day, someone who would turn everything upside down but give you the story of a lifetime, would you have the courage to say yes? Would you let chaos become your greatest blessing? Drop your answer in the comments, because sometimes the best question is the one life asks when you least expect it.